In this demo, we're going to talk about an optimization technique called CSS sprites. So let's start off by adding an image element. We're going to set the source to images/dishes.png. We get this beautiful icon that I got from flaticon.com. So on this website, you can find millions of beautiful icons. Now, back to the business. Let's duplicate this a few times. Now for the second image, I'm going to use landing.png. For the third image, I'm going to use rocket ship. Then I'm going to use Saturn. And finally, UFO. So we get these beautiful icons. Now in this demo, these icons are laid out next to each other. But on a real web page, they're probably spread in different places on the page. Now, let's open up Chrome DevTools. And here on the Network tab, make sure Disable Cache is selected because we're going to refresh the page. And I want to make sure that all these images are re-downloaded. So to refresh the page, we can press Command and R on Mac or Control and R on Windows. All right. So here are all the resources that are downloaded. We can also apply a filter. So we can select a filter and go to image. So we have 5 images. Now, what I want you to pay attention to here is that for getting each image, our browser is sending a separate HTTP request to the server. Now, if we have a page with tons of images and we have millions of concurrent users, all these users are going to send millions of requests to our server. So that's going to cause a lot of overhead on the server. This is where we can use a technique called CSS sprites. So we can combine all these images into a single image and then get that image using a single HTTP request. Let me show you how to do this. So we're going to go to cssspritetool.com. On this website, we can easily create a CSS sprite, which is an image that combines multiple images. Now, there are many other tools out there. Maybe in the future, when you're watching this video, this website is not available. Just go to Google and search for CSS sprites generator. There are tons of websites out there. Now, these online tools are good for one-off cases, but if you want to create CSS sprites over and over, you would better use command line tools because with these command line tools, you can automate this process. Now, that's outside the scope of this course. So let's go to cssspritetool.com. Now, over here, we can drop our images, which can be PNG, GIF, or JPEG. So I'm going to drop all the images that we use in this lesson. Here they are. Good. Now, down below, we can select some of the settings. So we can change the image type from PNG to GIF or JPEG. I'm going to go with PNG because these images have a transparent background. Next, we have the alignment. We can align these images horizontally or vertically. It doesn't really make a difference. Next, we have a CSS class prefix, which is set to this value by default. I'm going to change this to BG-. You will see why in a second. Now, we can also apply a padding between our images, but this is really unnecessary. So let's go ahead and generate a CSS sprite. Now we can download it as a zip package. Inside the zip file, we get this folder. In this folder, we get one PNG file that combines all of our images. So let me show you. All these images are laid out horizontally with no padding between them, okay? Now we should add this image to our project. So I'm going to move this to the side. Now, here's the images folder. So let's drag and drop this image right here. Good. Now back to this folder. We also have a CSS file. Let's open it in VS Code. So this tool has generated a bunch of classes. All these classes start with BG-. That is the prefix that I said earlier. Now, after BG-, we have a name that comes from the file name. So the first class is BG-dishes because the name of our file was dishes.png. Okay. Now, look at the properties here. We have the background property, which is set to our CSS sprite that combines all the images. Now, after that, we have 2 values. This is for positioning the background. So in this case, we have the shorthand syntax, but we could also set background position separately to 0 pixels and -0 pixels. Now, of course, -0 doesn't really make sense, but this is a tool that automatically generates this value. So don't worry about these. All we have to do now is to copy all these classes and then put them in our style sheet. Now we have to update the path to this image file because currently we are in the CSS folder. So we have to go one level up and then go to the images folder. Now I'm going to apply the same prefix to other instances of this file. So real quick, and one more. So here we have two other properties, width and height. This is the width of each icon. After that, we have display set to inline block. You will see why we need this property in a second. Now, back to our markup. We're going to get rid of all these image elements. Instead, we're going to add a bunch of span elements. So I'm going to add a span with a class of bg-dishes, tab. Now, take a look. We get this icon just like before, but in this case, this icon is applied using a background image. So we have a sprite that combines all these images. Now in our span, we're showing only this part of the background. So back to our style sheet, we have set the background image here. Then we have width and height set to 100 pixels. Next, we have display set to inline block. Why do we need this? Because we have used a span element. And as you know, spans are inline elements. So we cannot apply a width and height to an inline element unless we set the display to inline block. That is the reason we have this property here. Now, back to index.html. Let's add a few more spans. For the second one, I'm going to set the class to bg-landing, just like before. Then we're going to use rocket ship. Next, we're going to use Saturn, and finally, UFO. So we get all these icons exactly like before, but with this new implementation, our browser is sending a single HTTP request to the server. Let's verify it. So we're going to bring up the network tab one more time and refresh. Look, there is a single HTTP request to download our CSS sprite. This is the benefit of this approach, but don't go over the board with this approach. Don't try to combine all your images in a CSS sprite. It doesn't make sense for two reasons. The first reason is that we don't want to combine big images like photos of people, dishes, and so on into a single CSS sprite. We'll end up with a really large file. That's one reason. The second reason is that CSS sprites are not flexible. So if you want to replace one of these images, we have to regenerate our CSS sprite. So we should use this approach for small images like logos and icons.